Nikolaj Coster-Waldau, who played Sir Jaime Lannister in Game of Thrones, will be taking on the role of a real historical medieval figure who engaged in a real Game of Thrones. The show seems to be about William the Conqueror of Normandy and his relationship with Harold of Wessex. They could go many different directions in the plot with this story. The most obvious one, and the one they are likely to be doing, is the years leading up to the fateful Battle of Hastings in 1066. To get a better idea of what the show is about, I will get into the history and background of these events and figures. Firstly, William the Conqueror was a Duke of Normandy on the northwestern French coast. The Normans were originally Norse Vikings who had raided the French, actually called the Franks at the time, for centuries during the Viking Age. Weary of war, the French king gifted the lands that would become Normandy to a Viking warlord named Rollo. This Rollo was a direct ancestor of William. Over time, the Vikings who settled here became French-speaking, adopted French culture, and began fighting from horseback as knights, rather than on foot, as was the Viking way. Fast forward to 1035, when William's father, the Duke of Normandy, dies. William takes the dukeship, but soon finds himself beset by enemies from all around. What was not helping was that he was 8 years old and he was of bastard or illegitimate birth, which soon garnered him the nickname of William the Bastard. For these reasons, William was a pawn in the first few years of his rule and a plaything for his extended family and other Norman nobles. Many guardians over the years came and went as they were each murdered by someone more conniving and ambitious than the last. Some of his only true allies during this time were his cousins, the clergy, and the King of France, Henry I. In late 1046, things went truly south for the young William when a rebellion in Lower Normandy broke out, and his enemies almost kidnapped him. He narrowly escaped and sought refuge with Henry I. Together they marshalled an army, returned to Normandy and soundly defeated the rebel Norman nobles. This did not, however, completely quell his enemies and solidify his rule. No, in fact, for the next 13 years, William would have to contend with and engage in constant warfare. During this time, however, there was a silver lining that came from across the Channel in England. The childless Anglo-Saxon King of England, Edward the Confessor, proclaimed the young Norman warrior his heir, being distant cousins through royal intermarrying. In 1051, William visited the kingdom in an effort to secure his inheritance. He quickly calculated that the most powerful English noble family, called the House of Wessex, would be his chief rivals for the throne. The House of Wessex used to be King Edward's main supporter because the king's wife was from this house. However, relations had soured between the throne and Godwin, the patriarch of the family, and so this prompted Edward to declare his distant cousin William his heir. Godwin did not lie down and take it, so he returned to England from exile with an army and demanded his family's lands back, which he got. During these events, William had invaded Brittany and secured their loyalty, which would be key later on. In 1053, Godwin of House Wessex died, and his son Harold took over as patriarch. Some sources suggest that Harold and William were friends, and that Harold took a trip to Normandy to affirm his support for William to succeed Edward as king. However, there are no English sources for this trip, only Norman ones which cast doubt on whether or not it occurred. Harold's brother Tostig had been given the earldom of Northumbria by their late father, but poor ruling resulted in rebellion. The rebels had won and demanded a noble from nearby Mercia by the name of Morcar to become their earl. Harold, likely in an effort to secure Mercia and Northumbria for a potential bid for the throne, threw his support behind them and the rebels. He successfully persuaded the ailing Edward to replace his brother with Morcar, which prompted his brother to flee England. On January 5th, 1066, King Edward the Confessor died. According to English and Norman sources, Edward declared Harold his heir and the next King of England. William disputed this sighting, Edward declaring him heir years before, and Harold's oath to William affirming it. On January 6, 1066, Harold was crowned King of England. His claim was anything but secure. He not only had William as a rival claimant, but also his younger brother Tostig. Also out of left field, the famous Norse warrior King Harald Hardrada of Norway also laid a claim on the throne. His brother Tostig was the first to strike when in May 1066 he began to probe England's southern shore with a fleet from Flanders. Tostig achieved no success and so set forth for Scotland. Meanwhile, William of Normandy sent a letter to Harold reminding him of his oath to uphold his claim. In response to this, the King of England raised men and ships to bolster England's coastline along the English Channel. William then began his own preparations for war, and even got the Pope's blessing for the invasion. He secured the support of the Danes and the Holy Roman Emperor, and trained his wife to rule Normandy in his absence. The Duke then built a large fleet, and assembled his army of mostly Normans, his Breton allies and mercenaries from all over Europe. He was ready to sail by August, but he received reports that Harold was waiting for him in force on the coast, so he waited and bided his time. In September, luck was on his side. Harold's brother Tostig had allied with Harold of Norway and invaded northern England. Upon hearing this, the English king pulled his army from the coast to meet this threat. After hard fighting, Harold's army defeated the Norsemen and his brother on September 25th at the Battle of Stamford Bridge. The Norwegian king and his brother Tostig both perished in the fighting. Hearing this, William set sail and landed on the coast of England at the cliffs of Dover on September 28th. William then moved his army to a nearby area called Hastings and built a makeshift castle to launch raids into the interior of the country. Harold of Wessex wasted no time celebrating his victory over the Norse and his brother by embarking at once with only a portion of his army to go and deal with the Normans. Harold pushed his army to near exhaustion by marching them 27 miles daily for a week. Upon arriving at Hastings, Harold attempted to surprise William, but the Duke's scouts had informed him of the English arrival. Harold then positioned his army at the top of a hill, 6 miles from William's castle. On October 14th, the battle began when William arrived at the hill and attacked. The armies were of similar size, but William had not only infantry, but also large numbers of Norman heavy cavalry and archers. Harold, on the other hand, mostly only had infantry and a few archers. William's first assault was a failure, for Harold had arranged his men in a defensive shield wall formation on the ridge of the hill and threw the invaders back. A segment of William's Breton infantry fled the battle in panic and were pursued by Harold's men. However, William's Norman cavalry caught them in the open field and rode them down. Seeing this gave William an idea, so he decided to try and feign retreat, thus drawing the entire English army off the hill. The idea was to catch the English in the open field, with exposed flanks, and destroy them with his cavalry like he did earlier. The next events of the battle are not clear, but what is clear is that the last Anglo-Saxon king of England died in the fighting. One source says that William killed him, while another says Harold was felled by an arrow to the eye. Whatever happened, he died in the chaos of the fighting, and his army broke once word spread of his demise. A day after the battle, Harold's body was identified, and his mother offered William his weight in gold to bury her son. William, however, refused, and supposedly threw his body into the sea. Another source claims that his remains were secretly buried at Waltham Abbey. Whatever the case, England would be ruled by a foreign Norman-French duke, instead of a native Anglo-Saxon. For the rest of William's reign, which lasted for more than 20 years, William contended with solidifying his rule over England, and constantly putting down rebellions, especially in the north of the kingdom. He also struggled to deal with his sons, who failed to live up to their father's name. So this new BBC show has a lot of material to work with, and let's hope that Nikolaj Coster-Waldau does as good a job playing the Conqueror as he did Jaime Lannister.